All right, everyone, welcome back to another episode of Christianity on the Spectrum. This is a podcast of around 12 years of ethnographic research into autistic Christians and ex Christians, primarily focusing on ASD1. In this podcast, we like to talk about all things related to autism, to Christianity, to autism and Christianity, and sometimes just autism. One of the themes of this podcast and one of my goals for it was to improve the dialogue in the autism wars and to tone down the temperature in a lot of fights between people with ASD1 and the parents of children with ASD3. It has been one of these issues that has been a hobby horse of mine and something that I care quite deeply about after I spent time working with kids and the families of people with ASD3. It became really clear to me that we need to do things better than we are currently doing. And initially, I did that by making some episodes talking about my research into ASD2 and 3 and how I sort of lost my my faith in a lot of the ideas that I had previously held about those by just talking to them. We had Freddie DeBoer and Amy Lutz on the podcast to talk about their critiques of neurodiversity. And we've done a lot of episodes, one about Catherine Tan's book, Spaces on the Spectrum, which is quite good. And I wrote an essay called I Would Cure My Autism. I haven't published the essay yet. On my podcast, I might do that eventually where I just read it out. But that essay was sort of a collection of all the things I've talked about in the podcast in one place. And after writing that essay, Jackie Kancir from the NCSA reached out to me to ask if I wanted to go on her podcast, Autism Confidential. And immediately I thought, oh no, this is a little scary for me. For those who don't know, the NCSA is the National Council on Severe Autism. And, I have had many interactions online with parents in the past, and they haven't often gone well. And so I thought, okay, I'll try. We'll see what happens. And I was very nervous for the interview. However, all of those nerves went away when Jackie sent me the list of questions that she had for me. And you know, she very clearly listened to my podcast and was asking me questions about things like my episode on critically examining critical New Testament scholarship. And I thought, oh, okay, this will be fine. This is someone who wants to actually genuinely engage in good faith. And then we did the podcast, and I thought it went really well. And I was really happy with how it went. However, during that podcast, it was basically just her interviewing me and me talking about things. And she asked me a lot of good questions that I wanted to throw back at her. So I have her on the podcast now. Jackie, why don't you introduce yourself?
Well, hello, Jonathan. I guess turnaround is fair play. My name is Jackie Kancir, and I am the Executive Director of the National Council on Severe Autism. I'm also the Patient Advocacy Director for Cure SYNGAP 1, which is a patient advocacy group for the rare disease of related disorders. More importantly, though, I'm also mom to Jaden, who is almost 23 now. She'll be 23 in June. And I'm the sibling of a brother who's 3 years younger than me, who, when we were younger, his original diagnosis was PDD-NOS.
Yeah, so for those who don't know, PDD-NOS was one of those conditions that a lot of people were diagnosed with that was folded into the autism spectrum disorder after the autism spectrum disorder category after DSM-5. So I think the first question to ask you is, what is the NCSA?
NCSA is the National Council on Severe Autism. It originally started as a think tank, a group of parents and professionals in the community who put out position statements and papers and talked with journalists and policymakers just to keep this part of the spectrum as part of the dialogue. And then as it grew, we eventually, in 2023, we started the National Grassroots Network for that. And that really began a transition and transformation for the organization. And that started a lot of the community activation within it. We have chapters across the country now in different states. There is a volunteer leadership structure throughout the organization. It's almost entirely volunteer to this day. Myself and the legal and policy fellow are the only paid people in the organization. Everybody else remains a volunteer, which I'm really proud of because of the work we're able to put out, that it is such a grassroots effort. It really shows the passion behind the work that we're doing. Our organization is very targeted on a specific population. Our mission is pursuing recognition, policy, and solutions for um, the surging population of individuals, families, and caregivers that are affected by severe forms of autism and related disorders. So, that and related disorders also encompasses a lot of adjacent disorders that maybe they don't have a severe autism diagnosis, but maybe they have a neurodevelopmental disorder that carries the same types of symptoms and experiences that our children do. For example, you might be able to have a SINGAP1 diagnosis without autism, and those types of things would still be what our mission statements, our position statements are trying to resolve for this community. So it's really about the symptoms that they have and the challenges they have navigating the world and how we can work on policy to help reduce some of those barriers that are set in front of them.
Can you just describe what SYNGAP1 is for the audience who is
Hmm.
almost certainly not aware?
Yeah, I apologize and do that throughout this podcast. If you ever hear me doing acronyms or any kind of crazy term, you just yell my way.
I
So
will.
SYNGAP, SYNGAP is the SYNGAP1 gene is on our sixth chromosome. And it turns out it's actually pretty critical as a mediator of synaptic plasticity in the brain. It's a protein. And it was found, the first mutation of it in humans was found in 2009. My daughter was born in 2003. We knew by two we were starting to run genetic testing because she was delayed in everything all throughout the way. There wasn't a single milestone she hit on time, if she had hit them at all by that point. And she started having seizures. And the doctors back then believed that there was a gene, there was something, there was a nick on some chromosome somewhere that was causing all of her symptoms. But we ran genetic testing and everything came back clear. And it wasn't until she was 15 we re-ran genetic testing, and at 16 we discovered her genetic variant. There was a C that switched with a T on the 13th exon of her sixth chromosome, and that's SYNGAP1 gene, which means that in her case, she has a protein truncating variant and she only has 56% of her SYNGAP production. And again, this is a critical protein for the synaptic plasticity, to mediate synaptic plasticity. And so it's a biological confirmation of what we had already seen phenotypically through her inability to regulate herself, and the challenges she was having were biologically confirmed through this to be, oh, her brain truly cannot, like, this isn't a choice. And in many ways that was very helpful for guiding her supports and services from that point forward, because this it took the whole cultural argument out of it, right? It's no longer, is is this a parenting issue? Is this a she's not trying hard enough issue? It really became, okay, this is what her brain is structured like, and how do we build the supports around that? That reality is what it is. We accept that reality. How do we build supports around that?
Yeah. Yeah. So SYNGAP1, for those who don't know in the listening audience, it's not a it's not the cause of profound autism, but what we call profound autism is probably better thought of a cluster of different things, and within that cluster of different things, there is the SYNGAP1 variant. Is that a relatively accurate
Well,
explanation of it?
SYNGAP1 is very rare. There's less than 1,800 people on the planet that we have diagnosed so far. So I wouldn't even say SYNGAP1 is necessarily part of it. SYNGAP1 is one of disorders that can greatly increase the risk of autism, right? But they are distinctly unique and separate. As I said, you can have SYNGAP1 without autism. We don't have a lot of those that have SYNGAP1 variant found. That's something we do. We talk a lot in autism of not having biomarkers and not being able to confirm these things. And it's a lot of subjective diagnostic process through different. One provider might say it's ADHD, one provider might say it's autism, and the challenges of getting an appropriate diagnosis even when it is autism. But with SYNGAP1, we know definitively whether you have it or don't, you have a genetic mutation or not. But here's the difference. The genotype we know definitively. The phenotype is what is different there. So in when you have SYNGAP, you might not have as many challenges as my daughter has. You might not have autism. There's a few that don't even have seizures, which is less common. But some don't even have seizures. It just depends on where that mutation occurred, how much of the SYNGAP protein is affected. If you are somebody who has a SYNGAP mutation, but maybe it's only reducing your SYNGAP protein by 10%, then you have 90% of it still, you're probably going to be pretty functional and it's not going to necessarily show much of a difference for you at all. But if you have a protein truncating variant, you have a pretty intense phenotype, and it's likely it has impacted all the areas that SYNGAP can, including all the physical challenges that come along with GI issues, hypotonia. My daughter has swallowing issues. Those things come from SYNGAP. But then on top of that, she also has autism that is also caused from SYNGAP, but then aggravates all the other things that SYNGAP causes, such as the seizures, the swallowing issues. And that's where it becomes really complex.
Yeah. So you are the executive director of a large volunteer organization. How did you get there? Like, I assume you didn't just fall out of the sky one day and become executive director. Can you explain to the audience sort of your background in disability justice and how you got to where you are now?
Yeah, that would be a really long podcast, but even longer than
We've
our
done
other.
3 hour podcasts.
So, as I said, I was the oldest and sibling in my family, firstborn, and then a few years later, 2.5 years later, came along my brother. So my earliest memories that I have really are with him as a baby and growing up in the 80s with a brother with a disability, having to navigate that. I was Those formative years really were shaping what I would become throughout my life. My entire family worked in the field of disability, and this was back, it was a different state than I live now, but they worked in the former state run hospitals. My Some of my family were nurses aide. My mother was a therapeutic recreational supervisor. And then my grandparents worked there. My aunts and uncles worked there. Pretty much everybody in a town did. It was the job to have. And then I was in high school during the time period where they started to shut the hospitals down. And there was a lot of patients who came to their demise when the hospitals were shut down because they didn't have the group home support staff properly set up as a replacement. It was a very fast transition from the hospitals. And that, of course, was something I took deeply personal because our family had really come to love and know a lot of the people who had been in the hospital. And I also in high school was very involved in leadership activities and roles. I was in the state board for Kiwanis Educating Youth and traveled with that a lot. And I formed my own group in school, became the biggest club in the county. And it was before it became trendy or cool to be inclusive or any of those things. At the forefront of it was me seeing a problem in school where I saw another student bullying a girl with cerebral palsy. I was quite upset with this. And I ended up, as a response to that, forming an organization. My mother had always told me when I was younger and I was having problems navigating my own friendships surrounded how people were treating my brother and trying to really reconcile those two things. How can I really be friends with people when I also had this serious need to keep my brother safe and not experience some of the harsher moments of childhood when you're growing up with a disability like he had. And my mom's response was always that that I needed to use my words to fight this, that they were ignorant. I remember this is the first time I had heard the word ignorance. I must have been very tiny, but I didn't know what it meant. And she said, they just don't know. They just don't know. So it's your job to educate them. And so that was the purpose behind why I formed that first organization in high school. And I just was going to inform people about these students and give them an opportunity to spend time with them, take their study hall pass and come down to the classroom and be a peer mentor. And this, like I said, became the biggest club in the county. It changed the culture in the school. It's no longer cool to bully these kids. I think nearly everybody, if not everybody, on our homecoming court and prom court by the time we became seniors was part of the club. And we did a lot of good. We made a lot of changes into the culture. And that drove everything I did for the rest of my adult life because it showed me the power of community activation and how much of a difference it could make, not just for those that were the primary benefactors of that organization, which were the individuals that were in the supported classroom, but it also changed the trajectory as we became adults and moved into our adult lives. I had noticed where it had changed the trajectory of the other students that became members in the club. One student in particular, she was a very close friend of mine. I think she was my treasurer for the organization, treasurer or secretary. It's been so many years ago. But she's now very high up in ASHA. She became a
Can you explain
speech,
what ASHA is really quickly?
yeah, the American Speech and Hearing Association. She made this her career from having just participated in a high school club, right? That really drove her passion. And so I stayed within advocacy for the rest of my adult years. And my daughter, I didn't have her until I was 23. So all of what I just spoke of really was a prelude to eventually needing this to be a skill set that I had. I was very fortunate to have that background prior to having a child with a disability. My first child had no complications whatsoever. She was ahead of her milestones. And then my second child, right away, within the first 8 weeks, I knew that there was something different here. And that began our journey. So she needed a lot of advocacy. It was different back then. There weren't all of these internet groups and free flowing information and YouTube videos. There was just scrounging for information, but we did. And we got through education, and every year seemed to be a new battle, whether she would be allowed to ride a school bus and did least restrictive education apply to transportation or just to the classroom, and having to educate the school systems along the way just to get her access to a free and appropriate public education. That was many, many years of my life was with that. And as she got older and I eventually, when NCSA came on the scene, I had already really been starting to have that break with the original social justice movement, disability rights and social justice movement. I was starting to have a break from it already. And here came NCSA on scene, and it was just a breath of fresh air because I felt like they weren't gaslighting me. And it was just a Facebook group back then. But then Jill, the president, had reached out to me one day after seeing one of my blog posts and said, "Hey, could we share this on our blog?" And she called me and we had a Zoom chat, and she was very relatable. And she said, "Hey, we're gonna have this policy committee for NCSA. Would you like to join that?" And so we did that for a while, and that was my first entrance into NCSA was as a volunteer. We would meet monthly or so, and with other professionals and advocates across the country, and set up the policies. And when the National Grassroots Network came into formation, that's when uh, I moved up into a paid role, originally as policy director and then as executive director.
Yeah, so you mentioned a sort of break with disability justice and that you
Mm-hmm.
felt like you were being gaslighted. Can you explain what you mean by that and that sort of experience?
Oh, it was a emotionally destabilizing time because, as I just alluded to, it was a very long history with this movement. I really feel like I don't even remember at what point in my life there was the emergence of disability rights movement and things. It almost seemed like it came into being. I was already involved with my philanthropy work in disability programming before that came into play. And so I don't really remember a time in my life that this wasn't part of it. And then I had a daughter who, like I said, has an extraordinary level of support. And I never went into this with her thinking that the world was just going to treat her fairly. Again, I was a sibling. My earliest memories were of trying to right the societal wrongs that I saw occurring to my brother. So I expected there was this level of expectation that was really about acceptance, that the world was just going to be harder on her and it was going to be a challenging place for her. But yet there was always that backup in my mind that there was the disability rights community. There was going to be a place that accepted her. There was going to be people who would fight for her. And the older she got, and that was true in the beginning, but the older she got, the more challenging her behaviors became. The the bigger she got, the less it was just this oh cute little girl. Now she's in an adult sized body. The more and more she became excluded from even those circles. And that was just a paradigm shift in my ideology. It was something I had to come to reckon with, that this this movement that I had been such a stark believer in was actually one that maybe some of these things that we had pushed forward, these concepts of inclusion and integration, might be a little more hollow than we knew, and that in some ways the zealous nature of the movement ended up inadvertently excluding those who would need the support the most.
Yeah, so that I have not had even close to the same experience as you, but I slowly came to similar realizations, and I've been talking about them to various degrees. But a thing that gets brought up a lot, and I'm not into language policing on this podcast. You can use whatever terms you'd like, so long as you're not saying slurs. Is really my only feeling on language. But within autism circles, saying things like, at least my side of the autism circles, saying things like severe autism usually starts to raise the hairs on people's back, or the warning lights start going off. Why do you use the term severe autism, and what does that indicate that something like autism or ASD3 wouldn't indicate?
Yeah. So, first of all, I should hedge it that I am in no way saying that ASD1 is easy autism. That's not what we're
Yeah,
saying
yeah,
when
yeah,
we're saying
yeah,
that.
exactly.
And there's no such thing, right? And so, in fact, we quite argue the opposite, that a diagnosis of autism is a diagnosis of anything is to have some type of intervention, supports, accommodations necessary, right? So it really would not make any sense for us to indicate that ASD1 therefore is easy autism or easy life. The Why we say severe autism or profound autism, and honestly, I don't care what anybody calls it. And if somebody wants to call it the McCafe autism, I don't care. But the reason that we have this differentiation is so both sides of this are protected in the policy discourse. The types of supports that my daughter and those that would fall into this kind of cohort represent, they are not supports that would be appropriate for the vast majority of the population, but yet without said supports would be oftentimes life limiting or life threatening for this population. And so we are really trying to, whatever it's called, whatever box you want to put it around it and wrapping you want to give it, we are really trying to say, hey, this group of people over here needs XYZ. And we recognize that for the rest of society that might not be appropriate. And we certainly do not want our advocacy for the things our children need to impose upon the rest of the population who does not need those things. But at the same time, if all we are talking about is the things that the rest of that society needs and not what our children need, then we get to where we are now, where the types of things that they needed have now gone to wind, and we have not replaced it with an appropriate alternative. And for many, many families, the entirety of their care is upon the family caregiver who is aging, who has been doing this for decades without complaint, without an issue, grateful that they can. But now those aging caregivers are that. They are aging and they're feeling their bodies start to give way. And they're wondering, oh, wait, if somebody can't come and give me an hour of respite once a year, what's going to happen if my back goes completely out? What's going to happen if I pass away? Who is going to provide this care? And recognizing that the time to get those supports in place is past for a lot of families. They're running on empty time at this point. And that's why we talk about severe and profound autism. Whatever you call it, we're talking about a portion of the population that doesn't have access to the very basic types of supports and services they might need in order to stay alive if their caregiver didn't today.
Yeah. Is that how you would define severe autism or profound autism, or would you use a different way of explaining what it is in terms, how do we differentiate severe autism from other forms of autism?
So this is a hotly contested issue, especially this
It
past
is.
couple of weeks. It just never
Yep.
ends.
Yep.
So there was originally, as you know, the Lancet Commission came out with the first discussions on profound autism. We already were the National Council on Severe Autism, and our definition was continuous or near continuous support, and that, so we're talking anywhere from 16 to 24 hours a day, right? This is somebody you're not going to leave at any point alone, home alone, not for 5 minutes to go down to the gas station or something. This is somebody is always going to have to be present. And then we also had a heavier focus on that they had cognitive or functional impairments, any combination of cognitive or functional impairments, that they in a large subset, often dealt with challenging behaviors such as aggression or self-injury that might render it unsafe for them to participate in daily life unless they had that intensive level of support in place. However, then the Lancet Commission came out with profound autism, and it was originally an administrative term that was mostly used as a guide for researchers in the beginning because we were trying to get the focus on, well, not we, right? When they came out with this, it was really to put attention on selective bias. And so they had done I think it was Russell et al. Had done a meta-analysis on, I think it was back in 2016. They looked at all of the research that was coming out on autism, and they found that only 6% of the participants had an IQ below 70, only 4% had an IQ below 50, and only 2% of the participants were nonverbal. And so the Lancet Commission originally focused on that 4 to 2%, and that they created the profound autism diagnosis to represent them, that this is a very understudied part of the population that needs an extraordinary high level of support, whose supports are disappearing day by day. And we are going to have a crisis here if we don't figure out what this population needs and start focusing on studying them and put those supports in place. And that was the intent originally. 50 is pretty tight. I'm not going to lie. It was concerning to me. My daughter has a 42 IQ. I know there's a young man who's about 10 years older than my daughter. His IQ is like 54 for a friend of mine. And my daughter and he are like two peas in a pod. They love hanging out with each other. You wouldn't be able to tell, I wouldn't be able to tell the difference between that 42 and 52, like it just 54. It wouldn't make any difference to me. So I was like, so what? Jaden is going to be considered profound autism, but then where would he go? Right? Or where would my brother go? My brother has a 73 IQ, but my brother does need some level of support, but he wouldn't be considered ASD1. He needs more support than that, but yet he can live independently on his own and those kinds of things. So what were we doing with that? So I was really late to the split the spectrum train on that. I had a lot of concerns on it. But the INSAR came out last year. There was another classification of it. And in the new one, they tried to identify some of the issues that had come with that. They surveyed a ton of the researchers and clinicians that they had access to. And it was over 60%. It was almost 70%. It was either 63 or 68% had come back stating that IQ was something that they did want to consider in profound autism. However, where that number landed was not what they were agreeing on. Like me, they were thinking 50 was too tight, but so they changed it to 70 and below, and then they went into these adaptive functioning, the functional impairments. And that came out of Matthew Siegel from 2 or 3 years ago. He was really putting us onto adaptive functioning. And I generally tend to agree with him on this. That is really what we're talking about here. This is somebody who is going to have challenges with at least extraordinarily delayed in things like toileting, being able to brush one's own teeth, being able to feed oneself, make one's own meals, those kinds of things. So your ADLs, your IADLs, your independent activity dailies of living, and your activities of daily living, those two things are going to be significantly challenged with what we're talking about. And it might not be solely based on IQ, but I tend to think that's more about our inability to have proper IQ testing for this population. That, here we are in 2026, and we don't genuinely have a really good method to be able to test somebody's IQ that is nonverbal or non-responsive due to the communication and social challenges that come along with autism. So because of that, there's one side of the argument that's going to say they're these brilliant little geniuses that are just locked in their mind, and it's not that their IQ is low, it's just that we don't have a proper test. And that's not wrong for some, right? That's an appropriate, reasonable assumption for many. However, it would be absolutely impossible and just statistically infeasible to think that nobody over here that is not able to respond properly to these IQ tests actually also has a low IQ too, right? We have to at least assume it's somewhat typical to the regular population. But that's what we're trying to parse out. These individuals who have both this intensive need because there is that cognitive and functional impairment is what we're talking about. Because if you don't have the cognitive impairment, if you do have the ability to make these decisions for yourself and to think in abstract thought, you are not somebody who should have guardianship, right? Um, but yet, if you are somebody who would not know the difference between a birthday card and a $20,000 contract, and somebody says just mark here, right? And you would be legally bound to that because you don't have a guardian. That's somebody who does need a guardian. And so there's a massive difference in those two experiences. And there's a lot of arguing in between there of where's that line and how do we define this. But when it comes down to it, that's what we're talking about. Who needs their privacy and their autonomy in that sense, their autonomous decisions protected, and who needs protected, period, from those who would have more capability to be nefarious because they do have an intact mind.
Yeah. And so I think the general trend, I mean, it's one of those things where I don't know, it's pretty obvious when you see it, I guess, is what I typically say. People often ask me, how do you tell the difference between ASD1 and ASD3? And it's like, well, sort of just watch them for a bit. You'll be able to tell pretty soon. It's yeah, the precise line where it's drawn is of course controversial. IQ testing is sort of one of those notoriously difficult problems with these populations. I have a whole bunch of friends who are autism researchers, and they are constantly complaining about the difficulty of administering tests and the variance that you get in tests depending on the conditions in which they're done, and how a lot of times when you are testing IQs in that range, the variance can be somewhat arbitrary. Like you said, what's the difference between someone with a 42 and a 54? Not a whole lot in a lot of cases. And is that because the testing was an issue, or is that because there just isn't much of a perceptible difference between those? Like, that's what's the difference between someone with 110 and 120? Is it really that significant? And there are all these questions around that. But there's yeah, I think it's generally the way I would describe it is sort of how you described it in the beginning, where it's someone who needs round the clock care or close to round the clock care, who if you did not give them that care, bad things would happen. And it's just that's how I would typically define it. So when we often talk about like high support needs, or very high support needs or whatever, which is like the technical term for ASD3. And I don't always think support needs cut it. I don't know how you feel about that terminology, but I feel like support needs kind of masks what's actually being described, because support needs can encompass a very wide range of different things. And I think that while support needs does cover some things, support needs doesn't really get to the level of specificity that you often need to describe exactly what's going on.
Yeah, so I'm right there with you. I'd absolutely agree. And I don't know when, like at what point in time you came into this, but I can tell you in the early days, if you didn't have what was an MR diagnosis back then, prior to Rose's Law, if you didn't have an MR diagnosis, even if you had an autism diagnosis or a PDD, NOS diagnosis, and those kinds of things, it's very challenging to get access to services whatsoever. We Some of my earliest memories are very long drives in a car because my mother would drive us 2 hours north to the only place that was even treating children that needed care like my brother did. So she was very much a forward thinker and wise beyond her years, and was able to get my brother supports and services very early on. But it's not like it was local or quite available. And that would have been different back then if he did have an MR diagnosis. And then as the neurodiversity movement came onto scene, it's almost like that switched somewhere. Where now it's to say, oh, that's not autism. That must be something else. That's ID. That's that's intellectual disability. That's not autism. And it's as if autism can only be in a perfectly healthy brain, a perfectly healthy body. I mean, it's the most ridiculous argument, but that becomes the argument of this autism purist type mentality that it's not autism, it's something else. And if it's something else, we're not going to even factor that in, that it could also come along with autism, because we don't want our services to be muddied up with those people over there with that also have ID. Those people over there that also have ID also have autism, and also, maybe they have Down syndrome and also autism. Maybe they have SYNGAP1 and also autism. And to this idea that autism can only exist in this sterile space of nothing else, just some communication challenges and some social challenges and nothing else, it's just not rational, because that's not representative of us as a whole, as humans.
Yeah, the typical way that I hear it when I talk about this stuff, people say, "Well, that's not severe autism. That's autism and an intellectual disability." And my objection to that is, well, how do you know?
Well, let's say it
Where's the
is.
autism line in the brain?
Yeah,
And
but let's
like,
say it is. Let's say it is. And when we look at the research and we look at where does this cliff of inaccessibility happen, it turns out it's not if you have ASD3 or if you have severe or profound intellectual disability. It's when you have the combination of those two things. That is when you start to have very limited, if any, options whatsoever. And then if you add on to that a medical condition such as seizures and those things, that's when you fall into this abyss. There is a place within our American healthcare system where there is no options whatsoever. There's not a single hospital in the country that will take that person in crisis. And that's a reality that most Americans can't even fathom is true, because it's America. There's somewhere you can call somewhere. Someone's going to be able to help you. You just haven't called the right place, is the assumption. But that's not true, because once you have that combination of that cluster, which is really what we're talking about when we get into severe and profound autism, we're talking about this cluster that exists. Why it exists so frequently with your purest autism, we don't know. But to say that your purest autism doesn't impact the same, like this isn't coming from the same place, when you have such high rates of this compared to the general population, there's clearly something going on there. When you have somebody with autism who's an Elon Musk and soaring rockets into space, we're like, that's autism. That we are happy to call that autism, and say, oh, autism can make your intelligence go off the charts and it can make you this super human computer. Great. We're going to call that autism. But we don't want autism to be associated with it. Couldn't possibly influence your intellect the other way. And it's like, well, is that really true? Or are we using a little bit of disability hierarchy here? Like that's more that what that sounds like to me.
yeah, and it just like maybe neurodevelopmental disorders can affect multiple places of neurodevelopment, maybe.
Crazy.
Just
Crazy idea.
crazy ideas like that. Or, like autism tends to be heavily skewed in bimodal distributions on pretty much everything. Why would intelligence not be one of those things in which you have a high bimodal skew? I don't know why we would, and it turns out that when we look at autism and IQ, you get a bimodal distribution like you get for pretty much every other thing you're measuring with autism. And so it's one of those things where I find, like you said, there's this desire to protect autism as this sort of sacrosanct thing that can't be causing issues or that can't be making things go wrong. And so it can't be autism. It's autism and an intellectual disability. Just from my own perspective, we know so little about autism, right? Just in general, our understanding of neuroscience it's developing, it's getting there, but there are so many unknown unknowns that to make a strong pronouncement, like it's not autism, it's autism and an intellectual disability. It's just like, I don't know, man. I think we should be a little more epistemologically humble with our conclusions before we start making grand pronouncements like that, especially on something as complicated as the brain. Maybe we should just hold these ideas in an open hand and be willing to say, okay, well, like, what if it isn't autism and an intellectual disability? What if intellectual disability is a direct downstream consequence of autism in certain cases? And like, yeah, anyway.
Well, what's very interesting is as a SIGEP1 parent, right? And how that has really changed my perspective of my daughter's autism specifically. Like getting to see the neurons. And is the first time that there's a Dr. Richard Huganier out of Johns Hopkins. He was able to show images of a SYNGAP neuron next to a typical neuron, right? And there's our pretty little neuron here with these little tiny dots of dendrites. And then to the right, to see my daughter's was like this tangled web. It didn't even look like a neuron anymore. It was just so many extra dendrites, and it was all tangled. And that scene in the Beauty and the Beast where or not Beauty and the Beast, Snow White with the thorns outside, and they just rise up. That's what my daughter's neurons look like. And I'm like, what? And so it made so much sense hearing all along as she was growing up that, because prior to being able to visualize that, I couldn't understand when they were telling me that the wiring's there. It's just like the sensory traffic jam, that prior analogy, and that some of the signals are on a superhighway where some of the signals were getting jammed up. But when I saw the neurons, I was like, oh, this makes so much sense now. And then as we started learning more and more about SYNGAP and the scaffolding and the structure of the synapses, and I see that a lot across autism and autism research. So the whole downstream argument honestly makes a lot of sense to me. I think when we're talking about a neurodevelopmental disorder, we're going to talk about something similar occurring in the brain, right? That for my daughter, it was a lack of SYNGAP protein that started to cause those extra connections. It might be something different in another person. But once that occurs, and those neurons start to tangle like that, the result is the same for each of us, right? It ends up that you are going to have asynchronous learning. You're going to have sensory issues, that one sense might be over amplified, one might be too dampened. You're going to have challenges with identifying social cues and body language, or perhaps with verbal communication. And it all stems from that same neurodevelopmental place. Along with that, if those neurons are that tangled, then maybe those signals aren't working well to the stomach and to the gut. Maybe those signals aren't working well to the bladder, right? And so that starts to have this downstream effect where we start to see those that have the strongest phenotypes of this. We're talking about individuals who experience the full range of clusters, where some people, maybe there's stopped at some sensory issues or some communication issues, but they eventually were able to adapt and overcome that in a way that they can function throughout life without having somebody there on top of them 24/7, and they're still safe in their home. For some of our children, that's just not going to be their reality.
So the NCSA does a lot of policy work and policy advocacy and things like that. If I were to give you a magic wand and say, you can swing this at a bunch of things and make problems go away, in your sort of ideal case, what sorts of things would you want?
I would want research specific to caregivers of those with severe and profound autism. It's an extraordinarily underrepresented population. It's wholly unique from any other caregiver population. They are not providing care for the on average 5 years that people generally do to care for their, say, aging parent. We're talking about 5 decades of care. And this is the first time we're seeing this population, right? Because previously, prior to 99, there were the state run hospitals, and you did not have this massive amount of people in our society that had given up their careers and have been providing unpaid care for the past 4 decades for their children about to hit supposed retirement age, but there's no retirement there for them, right? And so we're about to have a really big economic issue when both of them, the parent that's been providing care and their child, hit into full care needs within our social safety nets, right? Because if something happens to the caregiver, they're going to end up in a nursing home that is taxpayer paid because they're not going to have a 401k and those kinds of things. And then the person they were caring for is also going to have to be in some full term type facility like that because they need that level of care that the caregiver was providing all those years. That's a really silent issue that's creeping up on us. So that would be my top priority. Additionally, we really need to have serious innovation on what we are going to do as far as long-term housing and care for these individuals. When I say long-term housing, that's another thing. That's another thing that another term we don't really have a good word for. I have spent way more hours of my life thinking about this than I like to admit. But I don't have a good term for it. And maybe if you do, then let me know. But I hate the word housing because it sounds like we're just talking about putting a roof over somebody's head, right? And that's not what we're talking about here. It's a comprehensive long-term care, all of the needs, their housing, their meaningful daily activity, their ability to engage with their community, their ability to have access to habilitative care and to continue to build skills and those therapies that they're going to need. Their complex care needs when you're talking about the nursing care and the medication management and the seizure management that they might have and whatever else co-occurring issues they might have because they have an extraordinarily higher chance of having 5 or more in this community. So what do you call that? Right? Like, what is it that you would call that doesn't sound demeaning? It's not housing. It's not sheltering. These aren't, we're not talking about rescue animals here. We're talking about human beings. And I don't know a really great term for it. So we say housing, but that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about something much more comprehensive there. And that those two issues are the two biggest ones facing our community today. If you ask any of our surveys, any caregivers, it's what's going to happen to my child when I die. And if we can address those two issues, the caregiver crisis and the long-term comprehensive housing, whatever crisis, then we're going to start to really burrow down into the solutions that this population needs.
Yeah, that makes sense. So, jumping off of that, autism wars are a thing. You have your policy goals. Other autistic advocacy organizations have their other goals, often goals that are in direct opposition to yours. This is, I think, deeply unfortunate and a problem that I mourn for every day. I would say it's something I do think about every day, and I try to think about ways of making it so that people like you and people like me are not fighting each other. I don't think we need to fight each other. I don't think there needs to be a war between us. And when I was on your podcast, you asked me, is this a forever war or is there a bridge to peace here somewhere? And I'd like to throw that question back at you. Is peace possible?
I think in many ways, peace is inevitable. And the reason being is because if you look back years ago versus now, and today, I was doing interviews with these mothers for Mother's Day, extraordinary women across the nation. And two of my interviews today involved mothers that have 3 or more children with autism. And these mothers had children that were on different areas of the spectrum, right? They had an ASD1 child, a child with severe profound autism. They had a child that was somewhere in the middle. And one had a child with autism who just graduated college today. So these are women who have devoted everything, as any mom would, to her children over the past 2 decades, but they were children with very different needs. Nobody knows somebody better than their parents do at that age. And yet these mothers were able to convey how different the types of supports their children needed were and how much those needs were in contrast to one another. For example, the one mom was saying that if she had a daughter, her one daughter had been in a classroom with other people with autism, and one of the students had thrown a chair and had really scared her daughter, and her daughter stopped wanting to go to school. And this was a girl who loved going to school. And she was like, I think that my daughter would be better to have services that were helping her with understanding social cues because she doesn't understand sarcasm. And if somebody is bullying her, she's going to be less responsive to know to protect herself because she doesn't recognize that's what they're doing. She's going to continue to think that they're just being her friends because she doesn't know that people can have these bad intentions with her. And she's 15, and I want her to be able to learn how to protect herself more. And that's what we need to be focusing on for her. She doesn't need to be in a classroom where she might get bit or might have a chair thrown across the room and those kinds of fears. But because they're lumping everybody with autism into the same grouping, their needs are completely different. Whereas if her son were in a classroom that was only talking about, the supports being social safety, then he wasn't going to be getting the supports he needed. And so I think that hearing it from that mom's perspective was very enlightening to see somebody who loves both of her children equally and recognizes they need different types of support. But I think if you go 10 years from now, it's going to be very difficult to find people who get to live in the bliss of the kind of autism purist mindset. I think 10 years from now, somebody's going to know somebody close to them, if not their own child, that is intimately close to this severe and profound autism experience. And that's why I think the wars eventually are inevitable to end, because once you come face to face with the differences we're talking about, maybe the problem has been all along that those of us who have been providing this level of care don't have a proper way to articulate it to those who haven't lived it. But I genuinely believe within 10 years, the majority of society will have much closer contact to this and then can no longer argue against it. They're going to go, oh, they're going to have that same moment I did, back when I was like, oh, maybe this movement I've been such a zealot for, maybe there's a few things we've gotten wrong here. Maybe this isn't all working. Maybe we need a little tune up. And I think we'll see more and more of that.
Yeah, I mean, that was pretty much my experience. I started meeting face to face with people or meeting them online and talking to them about their experiences. And I went, oh, yeah, this is not apples and oranges. This is like apples and pencils. We are dealing with things in very different categories from each other in ways that the differences are so significant and so serious that it doesn't make sense to be looping them together in the same group. And we need to think about these things differently. I found consistently that the group of autistic people in my survey sample who have the most calm and level-headed takes on the autism wars are the siblings of people with profound autism or the ASD1 parents of ASD3 children, as there are quite a few. And I find, generally speaking, they have very reasonable and level-headed takes about what's going on.
It's important
As
to have the
part, oh,
experience
go
from
ahead.
both sides,
Yeah.
and that's what, you're really talking about there. And in our legal and policy fellow, she herself is a sibling. I'm a sibling. And then I had my daughter. And so it's easy to villainize the other side. I think that's really, it's not just something within the autism wars. I think it's just part of our culture right now, be it from the digital age and social media and everything being confined to 160 characters or a quick headline, whatever it might be. But society is just scrolling more, right? We're not deep diving into the content. We've just completely abandoned context often. And so it's who's in my camp, who agrees with me, and if there is one point that somebody disagrees with somebody on, and yet there is all the rest they do, they're going to focus on the thing that you guys disagree on, and it becomes this knockdown, drag out battle. And that's very unfortunate. But when you have somebody that has had really close experience, either themselves or a sibling, a child with ASD1 and ASD3, it's much more difficult for that person to get distracted as easily with those single points of, and they're much more likely to start to look for the nuance in between.
Yeah. Yeah. Part of the nuance in between, I think, is better, clearer, and more concrete definitions of exactly what we're talking about. I've spoken about this on the podcast before. I spoke about it on your podcast. I think one of the issues is that when we say autism, it includes me and it includes someone like your daughter who have very different needs and very different concerns. And I think the only way to stop the fighting is to stop us from using the same word to describe two very different things. And so I think we need some sort of split. I don't know the exact way to split it. My current proposal is that we keep autism as a broad general category for a family of neurodevelopmental disorder, but then give each of the current ASD 1, 2, and 3s, just give them their own separate names so that we can just clearly call out what they are instead of saying ASD 1, 2, and 3. Just give them fully discrete names because I think that semantic difference will trigger something in a person's brain to think about these things differently. But that's my proposal. What do you think we should do about the spectrum? Do you think it should stay the same, or do you think that some sort of split needs to happen? And if so, what would that look like?
Well, I think I'm definitive that some kind of split needs to happen, as we had talked about before, because culturally it already has. If you look at Assan's position statements to ours, these are night and day because we live on different planets. And that's not to say, as I had said in our podcast, I want to be very clear that I think Hassan's position statements are extraordinarily meaningful and important for the population that they're serving. Now, I'll have my own issues whenever those get broadly applied, right? When it becomes a broad statement of these aren't just a position for our population, they're for everybody, right? These kind of moral rules, and that I do not agree with. But our position statements are meant very clearly for a very targeted position population, and they're very different. And so when you look at that, I think that's clearly where an easy part of the split occurs, right? Do you is the lifestyle you're living and your needs and your supports and your accommodations that would be appropriate to your needs more in alignment with those position statements, or over here with ours? That is going to take care of 80% of the autism diagnosis. But what do you do with that other 20% that are like some of these here and some of these here? And that's where I think maybe there needs to be that third category. I don't care if there's 3, 4, 10. I don't care what it is, as long as when whatever we're talking about with my daughter, I'm able to talk about without having somebody go, we need you to label off all the different diagnoses. Like, I would never get through a sentence with her. Are we supposed to like talk about, okay, this is my daughter and she has autism and Lennox-Gastaut syndrome and SYNGAP1 disorder and hypotonia and dysphagia, and like, where does this end? I need one concrete term that when she's in a crisis and I make a 911 call, I say, oh, hey, here it is, right? I don't have time to list off 20 different diagnoses. I need there to be an overall term we're going to use that is something that's translatable, especially to emergency personnel, but also to others in the community when we're signing up for, a special needs kickball tournament or whatever it might be. They need to be able to look at that and go, okay, yes, we can provide support for this. We can't for that, that's fine, but we can for this. We need a term. And I don't care what you call it. I don't care how many ways you split it, but that's what I need. I need whatever I'm talking about with her not to be construed with Elon Musk.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think it works out poorly for both the Elon Musks and the people like your daughter of the world, just because, like you said before, the things that Hassan wants are things that would be good for a lot of us. They're just not universally good and they don't have universal applicability. And like, yeah, I read through a lot of their policy and position statements and I just think to myself, wow, these would be great if they limited their scope to a subset of the population.
Thank you. Yes.
but but like they try to be all things to all people and apply the broad concept of neurodiversity to a population for whom the framework starts to break down a lot. I think there are still useful things you can have with neurodiversity, but in general, I find the framework has a lot of places where it's probably better applied in other situations. I'll say that as the minimum. But one of the things that they will inevitably say is that no, you just don't understand. This framework can include all of us and it can apply to all of us. We just aren't doing it hard enough. We haven't neurodiversity hard enough.
Let me ask you, why is it important? Why is it important that it is universal? Why is it important that it can apply to everyone and all people? Why is it so offensive that there might be some with autism that it doesn't apply to?
If I put on my neurodiversity hat, it is because we are all bound by a shared set of interests caused by not being neuronormative. Because we are not neuronormative, we all have a relation to society and share dynamics with society that give us shared interests, and we must agitate for those shared interests on behalf of the non-neuronormative. That's, I think, the canonical answer.
And so Are you not able to have those shared interests and also additional needs? Like, where's the line when those things conflict? So,
Yeah,
say,
well, I think that's the crux of the issue is a lot of them don't think they conflict, right? You know, when they conflict is, I think, the fault line, because are there competing disability interests within autism or within neurodiversity? I mean, I think the answer is obviously yes. There are competing and mutually exclusive interests and goals, and things that would work out really well for me that would work out really poorly for your daughter, and things that would work really well for your daughter that would work really poorly for me. And I think the problem is that these sort of mutually exclusive issues are not properly addressed by the framework. And there's a sort of optimism built into it that wants to do a lot, and to do a lot that is often very laudable, but it's just not grounded in the sort of harsh realities of the world. I think is basically where my analysis comes to. But yeah.
so I saw this woman. I got tagged. Actually, my daughter's one of her former teachers tagged me in a post this past week, and it's a heartbreaking video. But it was a mom who was in the backseat of a car with her daughter, who had her hands completely wrapped up in all kinds of, looked like cloth wrapped around, but there was blood clearly coming through the cloth. And the mom was trying to keep her daughter from literally gnawing her hands off of her arms. And this mom was just frantic. Like, what am I supposed to do? This place, they say they can't do any kind of restraints. Everything has to be hands off. And she's like, we've got our hands all wrapped up, but she's literally going to chew her hands off. What are we supposed to do? And this mom is just frantic, and understandably so, right? But it was this crashing against this idealism of, we are going, that whole hand, we're going to be hands off. We're just going to kind of give somebody a fidget spinner and an AAC and they're going to be fine. But we don't talk about these harder parts, right? These parts that do include serious self injury or aggression. It's like we're not allowed to include that in autism. That has to be something else. And does it though? Does it really have to be something else? Because I know a lot of people who don't have ID that have ASD3 that are dealing with that level of aggression or self injury. So I don't think that those things are things that they can separate out. And when you have those and you measure that, those symptoms up against no police training or under no circumstances guardianship, that's where it starts to fall apart for me.
Yeah. Yeah, I agree with you. And I think the way forward to peace is recognizing that we do have competing and mutually exclusive interests, and that we should not pretend like we don't have those, and that it is possible that we just do separate things for separate people. Right?
That's
So
how I
there's
feel. Yeah, I
yeah,
completely agree with you.
there's no reason for us to be fighting about these things, and the I think the fight is artificial and it's forced and it doesn't need to be happening. And there are so many things that we could just instantly improve dialogue with by just saying, I am not going to presume I can speak for people who aren't me. We often have the phrase, like, if you've met one person with autism, you've met one person with autism. And for some reason, people don't think, wait, that might apply to severe autism as well, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like that. It's one of those things where it's like, presumably that phrase means we have an incredibly heterogeneous condition, and because of that, we'll get to places where we have mutually competing interests. And in those places, instead of fighting over which interest we go for, we just go our separate ways and apply two different interests to two different communities who need different things. But with that being said, I think there are places where we don't have competing interests, where we can actually work together on things. I think there are some places where there is mutual benefit for both of us. And that part of ending the autism wars would be about working together on those things instead of fighting each other over what exact words we're allowed to or not allowed to use. What are your thoughts on this? Do you think we actually do have things in common that we could be working on together?
I tell you what, I have friends that are really incredible advocates, and some were late diagnosed with autism, and they're some of the best allies Jaden has. And they say oftentimes it's because they're in rooms where they get to hear things that people wouldn't dare say in other places, right? And yes, when I speak to them, I hear this mutual interest. We're on the same page, and there are areas where we agree. Um, but that is at my core exactly what you said, that we have different positions for different people. Like, I don't look at, and I'm not saying that there aren't parents in our community who does, but I don't look at Assan's position statements as a competition on ours. I look at that they're serving a different population and they're doing what they're doing very well for their population. The issues are when they try to apply it broadly across everybody, right? Because it doesn't reach over into ours. But the problem is when we try to work together on things, and I had written this down because I want to ask you this too. You had said that things hadn't gone whenever you reached out with parents before. And I'm wondering if it's because it's the same thing that, but inverse, that I've been seeing too. When we do try to work together with this, it's, I sense a feeling from the other side that they feel like our involvement is somehow threatening to them. That's kind of the response we get from it. So I don't know how to bridge that gap. I know that there is people working within it. Like I said, I have really close advocate friends who are late diagnosed and things that are some of the best allies we have. But they're confident and they're secure in themselves. They don't feel threatened working with us and helping. But I don't see that a lot on the other side. So how do we overcome that?
Yeah, amazing question. Wish I knew. So I'll speak to that first part. The reason that they have apprehension when dealing with me or when working with me is what I sort of jokingly call PTSD from the autism wars, right? So if I don't need to tell you this, but my audience may not be familiar. If you are the parent of a child with profound autism and you go on Facebook to ask about strategies and support in a neurodiversity affirming group, it will not go well. I'll put it that way. A very common thing that happens is, you know, a mom gets a kid diagnosed with ASD3 and then goes to the neurodiversity affirming groups because she knows that's the right place to go, right? I should be learning from autistic adults about how to take care of my autistic child. They will know best. They have the lived experience. And then they get absolutely dogpiled by people for saying things like challenging behavior. And so I think just there's a general idea that it's like, okay, all of you people have lost your minds, and oh, you're an autistic adult. Okay, you're crazy, and you can't help me. And so I think that's where a lot of it comes from, is just having very bad encounters online with people who are seeing each other through screens and not touching grass. You know, like at the end of the day, a lot of the sort of vitriol comes from people who don't talk to each other. Like I've in my in two of my old churches, we had parents who had children in L'Arche communities. So the L'Arche, for those who don't know, is an intentional community. It's like a faith-based Christian intentional community where people live together. Typically, they have intellectual disabilities and other things like that, and so they live in community together. And you know, when you're talking to someone, when you're like at church coffee hour, it's very hard to be mad at someone and yell at them to their face when they're just like being polite, drinking tea or whatever. And I, yeah, so there's sort of that aspect where we don't have that human on human face to face interaction with the other people, and so there are issues there. I'll say so. Like when it comes to like me trying to work with them, it's largely because their perception of me is one of the autism warriors, keyboard warriors on their Facebook group yelling at them, and so I try not to hold that against them because it's like I don't know. I would probably feel pretty bitter if that was my situation as well. And so I'll just see what I can do to help wherever I can. And I think a lot of it is just a lot of people on my side are like you said, feel threatened by the existence of severe autism, because it's really hard to look at severe autism and not to think, oh, I actually think something's gone wrong here. I think there is a problem that needs to be solved. And, you know, when your biggest challenges are social integration issues that you can't help and that are very hard to deal with and very hard to overcome, that, I mean, it sucks when people treat you like a medical case that needs to be fixed, when it's like, I kind of just need you guys to be a little nicer to me and extend me a little more social grace. And so a lot of people who are, I guess, not as secure in their identity or not as grounded in that, see the existence of ASD3 as a threat to them, because it means a threat to their personal identity. And again, this is another reason why I think spectrum splitting is probably a good idea, because if you're like, well, for this population, we can talk about a mostly medical intervention route. And for this other population, let's talk about a social intervention route. And so I think that would be a good reason. But I think, I forget where I read it. It might have been Amy Lutz's book, where she talks about the 50-minute challenge or something like that, or the 1 hour challenge. And the idea is, you as a person with ASD1, before talking about people with ASD3, just spend an hour with someone who is ASD3 and just hang out with them for an hour and see if your ideas maintain that contact, right? Just sit with them and talk with them and be with them, and then try to come up with your ideas still actually hold. For some people, it takes more than an hour, of course, but there's a very large portion where I just think my side doesn't touch grass enough and needs to. And then there's the other side, I will say, of the autism wars, where, you know, I say I have autism, and then someone says, yeah, that's because you're vaccine injured and you need to be saved by these miracle cures. I remember the first priest that I disclosed my autism diagnosis to took me aside and like in hushed tones told me that I needed to cut gluten out of my diet and that would cure my autism.
My mother-in-law used to tell me I needed to pray harder over my husband to cure his TBI.
Yeah, and there are lots of things like that, right? Or like where, while my side definitely needs to touch grass, there's a different type of grass touching that the other side needs to do. Editing John here, but do you know who doesn't need to touch grass? That's right, the Against Malaria Foundation, for whom this podcast is doing a fundraiser. The Against Malaria Foundation is an incredibly efficacious and effective charity that saves lives and prevents malaria. It is a very good charity, and we have raised over $29,000 for the Against Malaria Foundation since the publishing of this podcast. This is absolutely wild and has blown my expectations. If you want to like motivate me to make an episode on a specific topic, donating to the Against Malaria Foundation has been the reason for at least 2 episodes. now. It genuinely helps motivate me to do my work, to do the research, to do the writing, to know that there is some sort of tangible thing that is there. It is. I've been reliably informed that malaria is a somewhat uncomfortable condition that can, in occasion, lead to death. And so knowing that my podcast is helping to alleviate that in some way does genuinely help me keep making episodes and keep going. So if you have enjoyed this podcast, the discussions on it, or anything that we've done, please, please, please consider donating to the Against Malaria Foundation. Link is in the description. All right. Transition. That being said, I will say the burden of grass touching should be on my side because we have significantly fewer things to deal with. I think one of my things is, I think as a principle of Christian charity, we should start learning to turn the other cheek and sort of just accept that sometimes these interactions aren't always going to go the way that we want, and that oftentimes caregivers are under a lot of stress and a lot of fatigue and don't always say the nicest things to you and don't always come off as the nicest people on earth, because sometimes they are looking for a person to take out their frustrations on, and sometimes that might be you because they've been getting yelled at in Facebook groups by other autistic adults, and now you're an autistic adult in front of them, and so they're going to tell you some things, which has happened more than once to me. You know, I go on public panels, I go speak at churches, and I have people who will, without me saying anything, like just showing up being like, I don't like that you're here. And it's like, okay, I think we should calm down. We should turn down the temperature just a little bit. So yeah, I think those things often also happen, but I think a really good way to help end the autism wars is to find what those shared interests actually are. And so I have a few, and I'll pitch them to you, and you tell me if you agree these are shared interests.
I feel like I'm in a game show. Yeah, do it.
Yeah.
Tell me the first one. We need game show music after this. I will.
Music. Okay, so the first one is disability policy overall reform for things like funding, disability payments, that type of thing. People in my audience who aren't on disability might not know this, but the rules for it get pretty weird and arbitrary. And they get weird and arbitrary for, I think, everyone. Is that generally your experience?
Yeah, it certainly is. My daughter just had her annual about reevaluation for her waiver, and her support coordinator said they haven't sent out renewal letters for everybody, but if you get one, then do XYZ. And I was like, why would I get a renewal for her? She's over 18. She's on SSI. She's not on Medicaid as an income deemed person. She's on Medicaid through SSI. It's a different eligibility. And she's like, well, they're sending them out to everybody. And I was like, how are they doing that when I can't even change her address with TennCare, with the Medicaid administrator in the state? I have to change it with SSI, and SSI has to change it. Like, TennCare doesn't even accept me giving them information when we change our address, but you're going to send out stuff that I'm going to have to fill out to keep her Medicaid. It's just so bizarre. The way that they're doing things is incredibly frustrating, and I don't have an intellectual disability, so I cannot imagine trying to manage this system if you did have a disability like that. And if you don't have any mental health challenges, just dealing with the insurance companies sometimes will make you feel like you certainly have one because it is just maddening. It really is.
Yeah, and so I think this is like a rich place where we both have a lot of shared interests, that if we wanted to, like, if you want to do autism policy work, this is a really great place for you to start. Where doing something like this would not only have a really high impact for autistic people on your end of the autism spectrum, but will have a broad positive impact for everyone. So working on efficiencies in these systems and making them less complex and less convoluted. An example that was recently given to me by a friend was she is the caretaker of a child with ASD3 who needs to take meds. She is getting payment from the government to be his caretaker. However, she is not legally licensed to give him medication. So she needs to clock in and out of her job caring for her own child. So she goes from caregiver, clocks out, gives her son the medication, clocks back in, why are we doing this?
So
Why
this is,
are we breaking this down like this?
yeah, this is a common issue, and it's been an issue with my daughter too. So my daughter at one point during catatonia, which we're seeing more and more, that's another thing we see more and more prevalence with autism. Like, why is there this surge in catatonia cases? Well, when she had catatonia, nobody knew what the heck was happening, and she was entering into malignant catatonia. She was holding her urine for over 24 hours. She was hospitalized multiple times for it, and eventually she started needing to be catheterized every 4 to 6 hours. And so I had to learn how to catheterize my teenage daughter, and I would have to catheterize her every 4 to 6 hours. Now, she had home nursing care at the time, but it was a CNA. The CNA is the one helping to teach me how to do this because she's seen this done so many times before. And yet, she's not allowed to catheterize my daughter because she's a CNA and it has to be an RN. But the insurance company won't pay an RN to be there 40 hours a week. So they're paying the CNA to be there. But the CNA is not legally allowed to do all the care tasks. So then it has to go onto the parent who has no training in it and no medical background. The parent has to do these things. If the parent's allowed to do it, but the medical professional is not allowed to do it, how about we make something? And that's what eventually we started talking about in Tennessee is adding on, right? So somebody who's a CNA might not have the time and the financial ability to go back to school to be an LPN or an RN. And they shouldn't have to, right? But maybe they get a certification that is specific to med administration, med certing them, or catheterizing, whatever it might be, those kinds of tasks that are much more common that the insurance company is not going to want to pay an RN to come in to do. But you would have a cert on top of whatever your general certification is. And then with that, hopefully, also comes pay enhancements for these care workers who are already underpaid. But if you are a CNA who has a med cert and also has a cath cert, then maybe you get an extra $3 an hour versus somebody who doesn't.
And these are issues that affect everyone across the autism spectrum. I mean, so this is something that if you want to really help autistic people as a group, this would be a great place to work on and to be doing political advocacy in.
And not just autism. I think that it's
Yeah,
anybody really that
anyone
is
with
requiring that
disabilities,
kind of
really.
care. Yeah, require that personal care assistance like that, whether it's through a CNA, whatever the position might be, with your ADLs, your IADLs, and those kinds of things like med administration and whatever. Then I think that whatever your diagnosis, having access to better quality staff that can do these things and get paid for it is going to benefit the entire population.
Yeah, other good places to work on would be just like SSI and disability payment related stuff. There are
Nightmare.
a few wild rules that vary from state to state and province to province, but I wanted my friend who has ASD1 to help me with my podcast work as a research assistant, and turns out I couldn't pay him to do the work, because if I paid him, he would lose his disability. And that's absurd. Like
Yeah,
people are worried about the system being scammed. And then this also applies to people with ASD3 as well, because they, once they become adults, they can only do so many things before they lose disability payments or disability benefits. And then there are things like you have to count for meals that the parent makes for the
right,
child
right.
and things like that, where it's like, this is stupid. Come on, guys.
Yeah, I mean, if you're a parent of a child with ASD3 and this is somebody who continues to need all of the same levels of care, if not more, let's be serious, if not more than when they were toddlers, because it's a lot easier to change a 2-year-old's diaper than a 20-year-old who is like potentially being aggressive or having self-injurious behaviors in the moment. But if you're performing all those same tasks, you're continuing, you still have to ensure that they have meals and you still have to do their bathing and their toileting and all those things. Nothing has changed for you in all these years. But the day they turn 18, now they're an adult, right? And if at that point they're supposed to be eligible for SSI, but according to the federal government's rules, if they're not paying their fair share in the house and you're not charging them rent, then you're not going to get the full SSI amount because you're providing an in-kind donation to your child for allowing them to stay in your house and not be homeless. It's like, what?
Yeah.
It's just craziness. So I hear you. I
And
hear you. It's
that applies equally to people with ASD1 and is a massive problem for people with ASD1 who are like, need to stay at home with parents to get their feet under them. And the same rules apply, and these are all just kind of stupid.
yeah. I mean, my brother is doing really well, and he's quite independent now. But we were almost 40 before he really figured it out and was able to stay on his own. There have been a couple times prior to that where he had tried it out temporarily and it just went massive disaster one way or another. By the time we were like our late 30s, early 40s, he started to figure it out and he did really, really well. He really excelled. But prior to that, he was at one either with my mom or me throughout most of my adult life. And all that time, we had to factor in what we were providing him as part of this in-kind donation or in-kind care or whatever they call it in Social Security. But it just was absurd because this is somebody who we had tried repeatedly to get into employment. And every time we would go into intensive case management back then, he didn't have the irony of this. So he didn't even have access to the waivers back then. You had to have you had to have a much more significant disability like my daughter does now. And during that period of time when we're in our early adulthood, she was young, right? And I couldn't access a waiver for her because you couldn't get the waiver until you were 21. And he couldn't get the waiver because he didn't have enough of a disability like she did. And I'm sitting here going, how am I going to get her to 21 alive if I don't have more support? And also, how am I going to keep my brother alive if he doesn't have more support? It's just crazy the place we were in. And now it's this complete turnaround where he could actually access the waiver and it would be beneficial to him, but he's been going 43 years of his life without that kind of support now. So it's like, well, yeah, like
Yeah.
he finally figured it out, but how much faster would he have been able to if he would have had access to that when we were 20? Maybe he would have
Exactly.
been able to be on his own sooner.
Yeah. And like, so these are things in which I just don't see much, if any, friction between people with ASD1 and ASD3 or their families, right? Like these are all things where I think we can all come together and just be like, yeah, this is stupid. We should work together to make it less stupid. And another thing that a lot of people ask me is they'll say, I want to help people with ASD3. I want to dedicate my life to helping people with autism. And how do I do that? Now, I used to say the best way to do that is to stay out of their way. if you really want to help people with ASD3, don't get into it. Just let them do their own thing. Let them be on their own. In the last 3-ish years, my tune has changed to this. So I had previously said that just because I had worked a lot with the neurodiversity movement, and many of my thoughts turned into, oh, they're going to screw this up somehow. they're going to find a way to make it about them instead of the people they're trying to help, and this is going to go downhill. But I've since changed my tune. I think one place, and I'll get your thoughts on this, that if you have ASD1 and you really care about helping people with ASD3, or if you want to help them, or if you feel called to it, get into care work. Right? Like, we have a dearth of care workers. Just go into nursing, go and become an RN or an LPN or anything like that. Because right now, as you've pointed out, we are in the midst of a caregiver crisis, and it is probably just going to get worse from here. And one thing that can help with the caregiver crisis is to go into care work. What are your
They
thoughts
can
on
go
that?
into any field, right? But you know what I think didn't make the most difference? And let's be clear, the neurodiversity movement was a formidable force when it was coming up, right? And it's like they didn't lose a battle for a really long time. And imagine if that energy got redirected into the insurance companies. If they went
Yeah,
inside, they went inside and they became the leaders within the insurance companies and did to the insurance companies what went to the rest of the cultural wars, right? And they just righted the wrongs there. That would be amazing for
yeah,
all of us, because it is just, when you were talking about become a nurse, and I'm thinking, is the insurance company going to pay nurses to take care of our
yeah,
children? Is the insurance company going to pay CNAs, or is it going to be these uncertified physicians that are under so much threat because they don't get paid enough? They're having to do the work of a CNA, but they don't have a certification, they don't have the career path, and they don't have the wage of a CNA, even though they have all the
yeah,
responsibility, if not more, than a CNA. So I'm starting to wonder, like, I just heard a mom in Texas earlier this week was saying that the insurance isn't going to pay for her RBT and is saying that she needs a BCBA instead. And like, I'm seeing them come at all these different positions however they possibly can, just to make it more challenging. So we really have to figure out what to do with these insurance companies, and the control they have over patient care, and especially when you have this subset of individuals who, whether it's socially comfortable or not, requires a high degree of medical support. These medical fields that insurance just doesn't want to pay for anymore.
yeah. And I think many in my audience would be perfectly happy taking it to the insurance companies. I don't think you will have much difficulty convincing them of that. But yeah, so I think, yeah, just working on areas like that. The biggest thing is I just don't think we need to fight. There are many things that we could do together, but in order to get to that point, I think we need to first realize that, yeah, we do have very different interests, and we shouldn't try to pretend like that's not the case. We should just acknowledge that there are many real differences. The real differences matter, and they have significant effects. But like, I don't have cerebral palsy. There is nothing that should stop me from working with people with cerebral palsy. However, if I start pretending like I have it, and I start saying, as someone with cerebral palsy, I think we should be doing this on our behalf, that would be a massive problem, and everyone would immediately recognize that as a problem. And I
Well,
think we just
not,
need to
not,
apply that.
not just that. I use this example often, but tumor. I had a temporal lobe brain tumor, and um, my particular type of tumor, I was able to have a craniotomy and then multiple surgeries after that craniotomy to repair the craniotomy. And it's not like this is an easy road, and nobody claimed it was an easy road. And nobody to this day is like, oh, we can't even tell you had a brain surgery or anything. Like it's like this is not something that's I ever take offense to and feel like somebody is diminishing my experience when we talk about also, I had a younger cousin who also had a brain tumor, but his was a glioblastoma and his was an unsurvivable tumor. And so he needed the hospice support, the support for his family to keep him comfortable. The intensive care that he had was not something that would have been appropriate to offer me, right? We needed to keep me focused on rehabilitation and that I would drive again, that I would walk again, and those kinds of things would have been a detrimental message to him, where it was more about accepting that end of life part. And that's a really poor analogy when it comes to autism, because we're not talking about any potential of a terminal diagnosis here, but we are talking about that very broad difference in potential experience, right? And it's the types of supports. And that's what I keep going down to, is that my cousin, and recognizing what he had and the differences there, don't diminish my experience at all when I talk about that. And I can have extraordinary empathy for his family. I would never consider going to his widow and being like, you don't know what it's like to have a brain tumor. Like, this is a woman who took care of her husband and her child while experiencing that. I would never think of doing that, but that is a really common experience over here. But at the same time, she would never, she's never come to me and gone, you didn't have a real brain tumor.
Yeah.
You survived yours. Like, and I think both sides of this autism wars feel like they're one of the players in that scenario at
Yeah,
some point in
exactly.
time. And it's just really unfortunate because you can have your experiences as they authentically are, and it shouldn't feel like a threat to another person who doesn't have that same experience.
Yep. Yep. More. Couldn't agree more with you. I frequently get accused of having fake autism, and my usual response to that is like, okay, let's just be clear here. We're dealing with a triage issue. I recognize I am not on the most severe end of the triage scale, but like someone who got shot 9 times and someone who broke their leg are both in the emergency room. And yes, the guy who has 9 bullet wounds in him needs more immediate care right now, or else really bad things are going to happen. That does not mean I didn't break my leg and it really hurts and I can't walk. Right? And
Right.
it's just like it would be absurd to go to someone and say, "You didn't break your leg because I know someone who had an amputation." It doesn't make sense. And a lot of it happens though, I feel, because people who have broken legs are claiming they have amputations or that they understand what it's like to have an amputation because they have a broken leg. And so I think just both sides should start to recognize that we are dealing with different categories of things and we should stop pretending like they're not and just work together on what can be worked together on.
Now, is it inside the mind of the neurodiversity side of this? There's a big part of our community, I think you're in agreement with this, that you to say that autism is just a difference runs a real risk for everybody involved of losing services, right? Because we don't give superpowers and gifts, healthcare,
Yeah,
limited healthcare resources
exactly.
and things. We give this to people who need some type of supports and interventions in their life of whatever, whether it's social support or their activities of daily living, whatever it might be. If you don't need support, then they're not going to give you this insurance. So the narrative there really running the risk of making this something that doesn't need services or support. Do you
Yeah.
feel in the neurodiversity movement, are they aware of that, like how that messaging can be threatening to their own services to make
I think
this
some
like
of them are becoming aware of that. In the last 8 or 9 years, I've seen a shift where a lot of them are like, whoa, wait a second, guys. What are we doing here? Does that message reach everyone it needs to? No, not at all. But I've been seeing some people go like, I think it was Freddie DeBoer who was on my podcast where he was like, "Oh, you have superpowers. You're Superman." No one's going to Superman and being like, "What do you need help with, Superman?"
yeah, right.
Right?
Yeah.
And it's a very straightforward point that I think is worth bringing to the fore. But thankfully, I think at least in the last 8 or 9 years, people have been being like, okay, hey, maybe we overplayed our hand a little with the whole superpowers side of things and should go back to a more like straightforward disability line. So if you look at like modern, so recently I just finished reading Robert Chapman's A Very Short Introduction to Neurodiversity, and in that they draw back the superpower and super ability rhetoric pretty heavily and have dropped a lot of that pretense and have started talking about it solely in terms of it being a disability and disabling and causing dysfunction. The issue I take with them is where they locate that disability and dysfunction. They locate the source of the disability in the society or in the mismatch between society and the different brain type. And so it's, I guess that's better than nothing, you know, like improvement to some
I,
extent. But I just personally am like, okay, like, what are we doing here, guys? Like, there are so many versions of autism, like my own autism, which is, to be clear, on the very mild end. I'm in like the top 0.1% of autistic people. And there are a lot of traits I have that are just maladaptive across every social context I can envision. Right? Like there are just some things that my brain does poorly. And I've learned to be okay with that to whatever extent I can. And I think the location of disability in places where it's not, or the locating of disability solely in one place instead of like a really complicated combination of lots of different factors. People on the profound autism side of the debate often look at the social model and say, this has no applicability. But I don't think that's entirely true. I
I
think it
don't
has
I
some
don't either.
applicability,
I think you're right.
right?
Yeah.
I think I can envision a society that is better designed to help people with ASD3. I can envision a lot of things that we do at the social layer that cause very significant issues for people with ASD3 that we should reform, that have nothing to do with the autism per se, but have everything to do with the way that we structure society, the incentives we provide it, and everything like that. But most importantly, it does not end there, right? Like
Right.
there are additional layers to this. You you were describing neuron configurations. This is not a problem for which society has a good solution and probably will never have one. Just realistically speaking, this is a problem that is not really emergent from societal mismatches with different brains. This is a problem of scope and scale that is specified to the individual at the biological level. So, anyway.
In a lot of ways, what the neurodiversity movement did to normalize the word autism as this thing to celebrate and not a disorder. And, you know, I just wish they would have kept the word, they would have done the exact same work with the word disability. And I think we'd be having a different conversation today, because I have never veered from the word disability is not a dirty word. And it doesn't make somebody less than to have a disability. We've taken this word and we're like, take the dis out of ability and, focus on the strengths and those kinds of things. And that's fine. But I can focus on the strengths and acknowledge that I have a disability. I have a lot of strengths, but I also have facial paralysis. I also have vestibular challenges. I also have single-sided deafness. I don't have to ignore those things and pretend those things don't exist to recognize the strengths that I have. I mean, and so I don't have to go, oh, single-sided deafness, the best thing ever. I love when I lose my phone and I try to call it and I have no idea which direction it's possibly in. Like, that's the most fun part of my day. It said no one ever. So,
Yeah,
like,
exactly.
this is clearly a disability and it's not a dirty word. But when it comes to autism, there's been this incredible push on this linguistic acrobatics that we've had, saying, oh, but it's actually a superpower and you should feel really great about autism. And I'm going, what about the person? And that actually is something that makes me really sad when I look at the result of this, is I see so many people that are hell-bent on protecting the sanctity of the word autism, instead of saying, you know what, I am, as a person, autism, non autism, anything else, inherently valuable and worthy. And it's not the word of my disability that needs protected, it's me as a human being. And that's a conversation I think that if we can get past the walls of the war, that both sides can really get a hold of.
Yeah, I completely agree. And that is, I think, a really important note. Have you heard of Leah Labresco Sargent? I don't know if you have, or if she comes across your radar.
I don't think I am. Tell
Okay,
me more.
she is a Catholic feminist. She recently wrote a
How did
book
I
called
not hear of this person? Go.
Yeah, exactly. How did you not hear about the EA effective altruism adjacent um, Catholic feminist? How? Anyway,
No,
she's a
seriously,
very
how? I
interesting
mean, if you
person.
know my like,
Oh,
yeah,
oh,
seriously, how? It
okay.
is funny.
Oh, I thought that was sarcastic.
No.
Oh, okay. We'll keep that in. Autism moment. Anyway, yeah. So she wrote a book, which I think is it's one of the things that I've been chewing on for the last year, thinking about disability, and it has in many ways shaped my thinking and understanding of disability. It's called The Dignity of Dependence, a Feminist Manifesto. And the book is about trying to think about and understand what it means to have dependence on other people, and that it isn't a bad thing to admit. We should just admit it, right? We should be fine with saying it. It doesn't make you a lesser person. It doesn't make you a worse person. It is everyone is dependent to some extent, and we often make an idol of independence and have these ideals where the only good life and the best life and the only goal that we should have is a state of complete independence from other people. And her whole book is saying this is not possible, and this has never been possible, and we should stop pretending that this was ever possible. And we should be rethinking what it means to be a person. And she's specifically talking about it in the context of being a woman and the difficulties that often come with that, and how, like, dependence in pregnancy and things like that, and how this makes you vulnerable, but being vulnerable isn't lesser than, and stuff like that. Anyway, she wrote the book, and I have been thinking about various parts of it for a very long time. And I think what you just said there is in the spirit of what she wrote, where, like, it's, look, you can be disabled and it's fine. You don't have to pretend you're not. You don't have to pretend this is any different from anything. You are still a valuable human being, and all human beings are valuable. And you should not be, like, trying to pretend your situation is anything different than it is. And I quite like the way that she put it, and I quite like the way that she was thinking about and writing about dependence. A lot of what she does borrows from disability advocacy as it was, like, I don't know, 20, 30 years ago, I think,
Mm-hmm.
which I think is a different beast than what it currently
It
is now.
was, yes. Yes.
It's very much a sort of an effort to recover that in a modern context. But
Well, it sounds like it came out of straight out of some of my essays. So I've written it down.
nice.
I seriously don't know how I haven't come across it before, because this is a lot of my work is on this topic. Because, yep, absolutely. I've actually had conversations with ACL and Mary Lazar on this particular thing, because in America we have the Administration for Community Living, and the entire structure of it is built around these principles that include independence, integration, productivity. And I'm going, how did these become the measures of human value? My daughter, if she never produces anything, is still valuable. If she is never independent, is still valuable. These are not the measures of success. These might be some people's goals, and that's fine. And sure, let's aspire to these things. But we shouldn't be limiting our disability programming for our protection and advocacy agencies and our disability councils to programs that are providing this inclusion, independence, productivity, integration. I'm going, that's not what the goals are here. The goals are meaningful daily activity, a purposeful life, right? There's a difference between feeling like you're living a purposeful life and having that tangible productivity to pay into society as a tax-paying citizen. There's a big difference between those two things. And I think we've really gone off course when we start focusing on those things. It becomes more about assimilation instead of integration at that point. And I think a lot of people with disabilities have sadly been thrust into this trap of saying the word integration, but it's really that they've been kind of sold this lie of that's really assimilation. Like, how closely can you resemble normative people, then be a functioning member of society, living independently? Oh, you don't need those supports? Great. You're just living on your own. You don't need supports. That's how we know that you're a success with disabilities. And it's going, wait a second. What about the people with disabilities who did need that support? And even when they have that support, they still are not going to be wholly independent. They're still not going to be working at a 40-hour-a-week job on a wage that they don't need SSI or SSDI, right? That they don't need those social safety nets. We are always going to have those people, and they still have value. And I just want us to get out of that disability hierarchy structure where we start thinking some people with disabilities are better than other people with disabilities because they can live independently or they can be productive. And those shouldn't even be part of the conversation. You can have a disability, you can be dependent, and you still matter. That's what my message is.
I think that's an excellent message. And I think that is a really good place to end this podcast. It has been a pleasure talking with you on both your podcast and this podcast. I hope in whatever way we can work together in the future on stuff. If there is anything or any opportunity that you see for me or people in my audience to help you out on places where we have mutual interest, please do not hesitate to let me know. It has been wonderful talking to you and getting to know you over these past few weeks. Would you like to let the good people of the podcast know where they can find you?
Do I?
Yes, you do, because the people in my audience are going to be reasonable about this, and if they're not, I will find them and I will hunt
Well,
them down.
so they can find me at policy at ncsautism.org, and that's my email. And also I'm on LinkedIn, Jacqueline Kancir, because it has to match your driver's license on LinkedIn to get your little blue check mark. But if they find me on LinkedIn, they can also book a meeting on there too. My last name is spelled Kancir. There's not a whole lot of us, so they can find me there. But anything that NCSA is doing, join our socials. We have Facebook, YouTube, LinkedIn. You can join our socials and find me there. Usually posting something or somewhere. And I'm also on Substack. Just my name, Jackie
I
Kancir
was
on
going to
Substack.
plug your Substack.
If I ever have time to write, I tell you what, it's been so nuts. There's been one particular article that my inbox is flooded with, and people are like, "Are you going to write on this?" And I'm like, "Yes, I'm going to write on it." And it was like 2 weeks ago, and I was like, "I'm going to write on it once I get my head out of water." I've been so busy at work, and I've still not written on it. It's just I don't even have time to write anymore. It's just something I really miss doing. I wish I could do more of. I just haven't had the time. Hopefully, that Substack will be more coming months.
Yep. But so if you would like to help or collaborate, that's where you can find her. If you would like to not do those things, don't go looking for her. She has enough on her plate to deal with.
Yes, that's it. I mean, I don't know if you saw today, but Amy put out a New York Times article today, and so our own community.
Oh, you were?
Yeah, no, Amy put out.
Yes, Amy.
Yeah,
Amy
had her New York Times article. Yeah, and
very good one. I will say.
Remember when I said there's like some division within our own community? Well, it came out today, full force, and so my inbox today is our own community sending me lots of not very nice messages about the article that came out.
Well,
so
you have critical support from the Autism Christianity podcast community.
Thank goodness. I need all the support I can get right now to get through the next couple of weeks.
In the we are not on board the facilitated communication train. I will say that Amy was right, and she should continue to be right about this topic, because it is, I think, a matter of great import.
I cannot imagine all the responses she got. If I'm getting them adjacent, I'm not even part of that conversation, and just imagine what her inbox looks like today. So for anybody who thinks there's not a cost for standing up for something, and the messages are so bizarre, because they're like, if she would have taken the time to spend 60 seconds with somebody with spelling, if she would have done a little research or fact checked. And I'm like, do they know that she did her dissertation on this? Do they know that she published on this, like an actual book on this that was more than fact checked? I mean, there's not somebody, I don't know of anybody in the world who has more experience and expertise on this subject. But it's bizarre, the comments that are coming in. And so I just haven't responded, because they're very emotionally charged, and it's hard to have a rational conversation with temperature so high. Hopefully everybody gets some sleep tonight, and we can recoup tomorrow and have a reasonable conversation. But it's a heated area over on my side right now.
Yeah, I get my fair share of angry emails. Thankfully, in the past few months, they've gone down. I think I've just alienated enough of my potential audience that all the ones who are still mad just stopped listening, and so stop emailing me. So anyway, but it's if you'd like to send me an angry email instead of Jackie, you can send them to me at christianityonthespectrum@gmail.com. You can find me on Twitter, which you can also send me angry comments or DMs. I don't mind. At ChristianityOn. You can find me on Blue Sky, christianityon.bluesky.social. You can find me in the podcast Discord. Also, this podcast runs a fundraiser for the Against Malaria Foundation. We are almost at $23,000 raised, which is wild to me. Thank you for everyone who has donated to the Against Malaria Foundation. Statistically speaking, we are saving people's lives from dying of malaria, or at least getting it, which is, I have been reliably informed, quite unpleasant. So it genuinely helps motivate me to do this work and to keep producing podcasts and podcast episodes if you donate to the Against Malaria Foundation. So if you have the means, please consider doing it. That is all I have. See you later.